Good morning. And today we're going to talk about family secrets. Actually, Family Secrets is the name of a chapter in my book, Low Magic. And I'm going to read a little bit from it. But the reason I'm obsessed with this at the moment, and please forgive me if this bores you to death, but I know very, very, very little about either side of my family. Uh, my parents uh, were of a generation that didn't talk too much about their past or their family's past. Number one, because they didn't know, because the generation before was really closed mouth about the privacy of their relatives and things, especially in America, where people come from different countries for different reasons, have multiple previous marriages and scandals and secrets that today people don't think a thing of, but in those days there was great shame for surrounding births out of wedlock and things like that. Uh, so I didn't know very much, only what my father uh, could tell me about his family, and which was practically nothing, and except a few names, and there wasn't a family Bible. We had to use my mother's family Bible to even put my father's parents and grandparents' name in. And of course, people in the magical community are usually at least curious as to the spiritual blood that's flowing through our veins and why we might be interested in this and this strange stuff. But anyway, a few years back, I joined Ancestry.com. Uh, just what you can do for free, on it. And I started to poke around. But anyway, in just the last few days, I've run across information about my great grandfather, my father's mother's father. And it is sort of blowing my mind because I am so involved in mystical and magical movements that had their bright spot in late 19th century London, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and that whole Dickinsonian era kind of stuff, and I just enjoy no end masterpiece theater programs and shows that deal with Sherlock Holmesy type stuff and era things. And let me just go on for a while, and if you don't mind. But I'm just going to read the very beginning of book 4, or chapter 4 of Low Magic. It's Family Secrets. Epigram is from Marcel Mauss, The General Theory of Magic. In parts of Melanesia, where matrimony is the rule, magic is inherited from father to son. In Wales, it seems that mothers handed it down to sons, while fathers bequeathed it to the daughters. in societies where voluntary secret societies for men play an important role, association of magicians and the secret society usually overlap. Some people in the magical community place a great deal of importance on their magical ancestry. This is not surprising because the romance and mythos of our spiritual art is certainly enhanced by the thought that we might, in fact, be a special breed set apart from ordinary people by the blood of our veins. I believe that in and of itself, this attitude can be harmless enough. After all, who of us wouldn't want to think that we are, even by tradition, descended from a Merlin or a Morgan Le Fay, a Cagliostro or an Aleister Crowley? Taken too seriously, however, such preoccupation with magical bloodlines can easily seduce us into blindly abandoning our common sense and embracing a form of magical elitism as foolish and as dangerous as any other name-your-own supremacy. Please don't misunderstand me. I fully recognize the fact that a few of us actually have parents who studied and practiced magic or witchcraft, and that they too may have had parents who did the same. For most of us, however, the magic we've inherited from our parents or grandparents is something less overtly magical than that determined by our family's participation in generational covens, satanic cults, or secret initiatory societies. In fact, I believe that we can discover more about the magical blood of our ancestors simply by examining their lives and characters than we can by analyzing their professed spiritual interests. I'll wager that if each of us gave it a little thought, we could find the magician in our parents and our grandparents and be able to trace that magic, whether for good or ill, in our own lives and personalities. I certainly can. As a matter of fact, if you wish to truly become wise and well-rounded as a magician, you'll sooner or later have to come to terms with both the good and the evil locked in the DNA of our own family secrets. With your permission, I'd like to share a couple of stories from my magical family tree. Perhaps you'll be able to see some parallels in your own life. If not, you might at least learn a little bit more about me. Okay, and then I go on. I start with my mother. And I'm going to completely skip over her because I've shared this with you here on these morning talks before. But not for the angle I'm going to take it today, actually. But anyway, I'm going to skip ahead to what I say at first about my father. My father was a different kind of magician altogether. He was quiet and moody, Scorpio, given to bouts of depression. He liked to drink during the years before I was born, but Mom's willingness to drive to his favorite after-work watering hole and physically pull him off the bar stool and out into the car put an end to that. Dad didn't talk much about his parents and family, other than to say he had one sister and 3 half-sisters, all older than he. To my knowledge, he never met any of his grandparents. His father came from France. Now I'm going to digress because at the time I wrote this, this was my understanding from what my father told me. Okay. His father may have come from France to enter the United States. But it is pretty clear to me that his father came from Canada. And for some reason, either visiting France or for irregularities of his immigration, came from France. Okay, we're French for sure, but this is, at the time I wrote this is how I said it. His father came from France and his mother came from England. She'd been married once before and had 3 girls from that union. Her father was an inspector for Scotland Yard. That is how my father explained it to me. It wasn't Scotland Yard. It was better. Okay. Her father was an inspector for Scotland Yard who died during the events of Queen Victoria's Jubilee. Now, the events, as my father told it, he had gone to Canada to help coordinate events for Queen Victoria's visit, and on the way back, on the boat on the way back home, caught pneumonia and died. The only thing we know about Grandma DuQuette's mother was a story that I find somewhat unnerving. Something that my mother didn't tell me until a week before she died in 2007. I was almost 60 years old when I heard this tale. I now know why she waited. My father was born and raised in Los Angeles, but had traveled to western Nebraska in the late 1930s to drill exploratory wells. Those are called wildcat wells. He met my mother-to-be, a waitress at a diner, and they married in the little town of Chapel, Nebraska in 1940. When the newlyweds returned home to California, my father was stunned to discover that while he had been away, his father died and was buried. And his mother lay dying in a hospital. When they visited the poor woman, she asked to talk alone with her new daughter-in-law. She asked my mother-to-be if she planned to have children. When my mother answered in the affirmative, the old woman pleaded with her to reconsider. Don't have his children. We are cursed. There is evil in our blood. I'm quoting my mother, quoting this woman. We are cursed. There is evil in our blood. She then tearfully confessed that her own mother was a witch. Now, I think I must here pause and point out that for this woman born in the late 1800s, the word witch did not refer to a person who wholesomely embraced the life-affirming, earth-centered worship of today's neo-pagan movement. Instead, it referred to someone who delighted in doing evil things for evil's sake. She went on to relate how her mother, her own mother, fed on the hate and fear and misery of others. How she would sit on the steps of her London flat and curse passers-by, especially pregnant women, then later delight in reports of their miscarriages and deaths during childbirth. She poisoned dogs and cats. She spread vile rumors about neighbors and relatives for no other purpose than that of ruining their lives. So hated and feared was she in the neighborhood that no child was allowed to play with her children. And if not for the fact that her husband was a policeman, the family would have been run out of the neighborhood. None of my father's 4 sisters had any children, perhaps warded off by tales of evil blood. I have since found that his full sister, his only sister that was his full sister, and the youngest, did grow and have a child. When I asked Grandma DuQuette, and when I asked my own mother if Grandma DuQuette's warning hadn't scared her, she coldly answered, "No. Where would you and Mark be if I'd listened? I wasn't going to let that old witch tell me what to do." Oh, thank you, dear. Coffee. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Excuse me for a second while I digress. Maybe I better have another sip of that. We just got back from the store. Thursday is Trader Joe's Day. You must think all we do is shop. Okay. That's, I'm going to go on for a second. I think in this case, Mom's magic served a very good purpose. It dug its heel in and triumphed over fear and superstitious, albeit with a heavy dose of fear and superstition of its own. Mom was a wild character. Even though my father wouldn't live the luckiest of lives, even though my brother and I have had our shares of ups and downs, I don't believe that any of the DuQuettes who sprang from this strange woman's loins are cursed with anything more sinister than our own human shortcomings. However, this unsettling story now makes me recall that for my entire childhood, whenever I did something my mother disapproved of, she would shake her finger at me and tell me in deadly earnest that I was possessed with the devil. I confess that at times I can be possessed by a disturbing, dark, and hateful nature. When I perceive that I've been wronged, when someone cuts me off on the freeway, when I hear of or observe the mistreatment of others or animals or my country or my planet, I become so overwhelmed with the most monstrous, blood-curdling images of what I would do to such people if they were at my mercy in some fantasy torture chamber, that I have to use every weapon at my mystical arsenal to force myself back to calm sanity. At times like this, I'm mindful of a great-grandmother who poisoned people's pets and delighted in the news of miscarriages. Now, I knew that my father's mother's father was a detective, and I knew that his name was Clifford Harland. My father was named after him because my father is Clifford Ernest DuQuette. And that Clifford Harland was a detective. And then I since find out that his wife was batshit crazy. Okay. So I knew enough that I could plug in on Ancestry.com. I could plug in Clifford Harland, his name. And that set into motion a couple of other things. that we've got the name of his wife, uh, who was Marion Harland. Well, eventually Marion Harland, but Marion Aldrich. And then uh, just in my crazy boredom during the lockdown, I started typing around Clifford Harlan, detective, Clifford Harlan, Sherlock Holmes. Just Googled around, and I found something. Not only that, I found a picture, and I found articles, newspaper articles, and I found out more information about him that is blowing my mind. Now, it doesn't need to be of interest to you, but two Canadian authors are currently writing a series of books, novels, okay, fiction, but history-based fiction, and Clifford Harlan is the co-protagonist in a literary series of books because the detective agency he worked for, the detective agency he led, was the largest and most successful in cases solved detective agency in the world at that time. And it was headed by a woman, Mrs. Booth, a key officer and founder of the Salvation Army. And it was a branch sponsored by that made it international. And in a time period where there was no other safety net of any other kind, and the police forces, even the Scotland Yard and the Metropolitan Police of London, were so overwhelmed with other things that it was hard for them to track down or even care about the welfare of the thousands and thousands of poor, mostly girls, who were being exploited in London. The story is starting to become so romantic, so masterpiece theater, so of modern interest, because this huge detective agency was run by women. And they were just kicking the ass of Scotland Yard. And so I wrote the authors of this series, and it's still in development. And the let's see, I'm trying to get their names for you because I can't wait for the series to get developed. Jim Burns and Sheila Jones, they're Canadian authors, and so I wrote them, asking if they had any more information, because I was reading these 1890s clippings from the London Salvation Army stuff, got his picture and everything else, and I wanted to know more. And they wrote back, my father's forebears were deep into the Salvation Army from 1883 in London. Several siblings, including my great-grandfather, immigrated to Canada to do the good works. And I've been researching the family history and continuing a tree as best I can, given the limitations on sources. Although my great-great-grandmother worked in the women's social work arm of the Salvation Army, she was never a detective. We, my wife Sheila Jones, and I decided to write a mystery book series with the aforesaid forebear not as the basis but the inspiration of our story. Our co-protagonist, Clifford Harland, becomes a detective in the real life, and get this is what they call their detective agency. It's a title of a masterpiece theater series. It's called The Inquiry, the Mrs. Booth's Inquiry Service. No, excuse me. The Mrs. Booth Inquiry Bureau. On Mars Street, Hackney, London. The latter started as a missing persons bureau and branched out into other cases involving crimes, miscreants, husbands, lovers who defaulted on their support of the women they wronged. It is a historical novel series. We chose to use some of the real-life personalities of the day, which includes Clifford Harland. His mentor, Isaac Unsworth, some of the Booth family members. The Booths were the founders of the Salvation Army. Okay. At least that's what I think. Booth family members and a slew of other contemporary politicians, mayors, etc. So we did search on Cliff Harden and found a bit of information in a few obscure books, mostly. However, they were about his cases and not on Clifford specifically. Hang on while I know I'm losing all of you. I got to get this out of me. A few of the Salvation Army's own publications carried this material, and that's a few things that I'd read. There are several contributors on that site who have posted family trees that included some or all of the Harlands. Okay. Private Detective Isaac Unsworth, who is Harland's mentor, was his dear friend and mentor for several years. But it's difficult to figure out how. Now here's scattered information they got on my great-grandfather. How in his 43 years, he died at 43. 1853 to 1897. Clifford managed to be a schoolmaster at 17 years old in 1871. This is according to the UK Census. 28-year-old principal of a boarding school in 1881. Then to get his on-the-job training from Unsworth to become that, quote, newspaper quote, famous detective of whom grandmother Jessie spoke, before subsequently at age 35 in 1888, the year the Golden Dawn was founded, becoming the head of the Salvation Army Inquiry Bureau. One source said that he was in the sleuthing game for 25 years prior to joining SA, but that couldn't have been. That would have been too packed. He lost his voice temporarily from teaching. One assumes, and had to speak softly thereafter. So sleuthing might have been a reasonable alternate livelihood. We also feel that Clifford's home life was, where did that go? His home life was not what might have been. We also feel Clifford's home life was not what it might have been. He took the essay job so seriously that he was seldom home for supper. Marion was unhappy, we think. They had something like 8 children, which was likely more than they could reasonably handle on his quite modest salary. He died young, just 3 weeks shy of 44, and left Marion to shift for the family, which thinned a little as the children got jobs, moved out, married, whatever. In the 1901 UK census, Marion and 2 daughters were vegetarian cooks. Albert, a tailor, and 3 others, 6 to 12 years old, were students or just living at home. There is an interview with Clifford in a 1893 publication that talks of his somewhat unusual methods of solving cases. This might be more in line with your interest and proclivities as a student of mysticism and the occult. The solutions came to some of his cases, he averred, came in his dreams. His methods were not well explained in the source, but it seems to be an effectual means by which to approach cases. He is famous for solving the so-called Forest Hill mystery, a knotty case that eluded Scotland Yard for several years. Clifford's passing sounds a little sad. His grave marker in Chinsford Mount Cemetery with inscription common chiseled onto it. Cost 1 shilling 6 pence, and the total cost came to £1. It sounds like a pauper's grave. Was Marion that poorly off that she couldn't afford something a little nicer? Was this perhaps a response to a marriage that was failing over time due to his being married to his job, as most cops, bobbies, and detectives are, it seems? Just idle speculation. We don't know what the truth of these matters is and would like to know. It goes on a little about other things. But isn't that interesting? And if you'll look up in other sources, newspaper articles and such, there are full articles on the unusual Inquiry Bureau and Clifford Harlan, and be looking for this new series, mystery series of books. As it comes out, I'll be very, very interested. But anyway, there's new things in my magical family secret tree that I'm thinking about it at the moment, and it definitely has opened up a new part of my brain and has activated different different synapses in my DNA or whatever they're called. Anyway, that's it for today. It wasn't much of a magical class, but I enjoyed sharing it with you. Anyway, until tomorrow, hopefully, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.